Today I'm going to take you on a journey, my journey, as a low-carb dietitian. And I'm going to talk about where we've come from, where we're at now, and where we might be heading. All with the underlying question in mind: have we ridden the low-carb wave? So my start in this journey, and when I was catching the low-carb wave, was around 10 years ago. And during this time, what was happening in the scientific world was the science around low-carb diets and weight loss were really coming to the fore. They were fast and furious. And some of these studies had been around for a long time, but actually now there were more meta-analyses, there were more systematic reviews, and it resonated with communities and academic communities. Low carb was becoming well known for not only being able to hold its own in terms of being efficacious for weight loss in the short term, but as you can see in the SHI study in 2008, it really was able to hold its own in the long term as well. This was quite different to when Dr. Atkins and the low-carb movement came around in the 80s, because that was all about shakes and it was all about bars. And this time, it's all about food. What was also happening at the same time was a real scrutiny into dietary fat and our current dietary guidelines. UK obesity researcher Dr. Zoe Harcombe spent 4 years in her PhD researching the relationship between dietary fat and heart disease, a relationship that we have come to know very well over the years. And she is, if anyone can critique science, Zoe is the best critiquer ever. And she did some really, really good studies looking at both randomized controlled trials and prospective cohort trials or studies. And what she found was that there was no significant relationship, no statistically significant relationship between total fat and saturated fat and coronary heart disease and all-cause mortality. So that really called into question the dietary guidelines that we were aware of and that we knew so well. But what really was the most profound change in my philosophy over that time was when the science around insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia came to the fore, primarily by Dr. Catherine Crofts, who's talking after me, in her PhD work. And this was interesting because insulin resistance was a term that I'd heard before, but I had never really taken the time to understand. And certainly in my undergrad and my dietetics degree, I never once heard that word before. So with something like hyperinsulinemia, which is high levels of, or elevated levels of insulin, one of the best ways to manage that, of course, is to bring insulin down. And from a dietary perspective, reducing carbohydrate was the thing that could do that. So once you see the science, you can't really unsee it. And that really indicated to me that our current dietary guidelines, which are really around eating a lot of carbohydrate and very little fat, are actually designed for a truly metabolically healthy population. But the reality is that the proportion of our population that's truly metabolically healthy is minute. So dietary carbohydrate restriction started to be proposed as the first approach for some conditions, particularly diabetes management. And that science of the time was pretty powerful. This is just a small snapshot of the plethora of science that was coming through at the time. From a practice perspective, there were probably about a handful of practitioners around the world who were practicing low carb. And it was a tumultuous time for some. So looking at these individuals, we've got Dr. Annika Dahlqvist, and she is a Swedish GP, and she was almost censored and lost her medical license and when she was doing her low-carb stuff, and that really took 2 years before they dropped it. Australian orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Gary Fettke, he was reported to the medical board by some dietitians for talking to his diabetic patients about the importance of reducing their sugar and carbs. And he was talking to them about this so that he could do less amputations of their limbs later down the track. He was censored for talking to patients for 2 years, and then that was dropped. Dietitian Jennifer Elliott, she was deregistered by the Australian Dietitians Board and lost her livelihood for a period of time. And then hopefully many of you would know Professor Tim Noakes, iconic, and he was hauled over the hot coals, basically went through a grueling 2 years worth of a hearing at his own expense because of a simple comment he made on Twitter. Closer to New Zealand, I was having some troubles of my own, and I had 7 complaints against me reported to the Dietitians Board. And each of these 7 complaints I had to respond to. The complaints were not by clients, the complaints were by my colleague, dietitians. And I was complained about based on the work I was doing, what I was saying in the media, what I was saying on my own social media page about low carb. One of the complaints even went to the Ministry of Education because of work that we were doing with a local boarding school to change their menu so that it resembled something that looked like it had been alive. We managed to get 40 teaspoons of sugar out of the menu of the school, and we did it in collaboration with the parents, with the teachers, with the students, and with the kitchen staff themselves. So it was, it was a bit crazy. Another one of the complaints was elevated to a professional conducts committee, which I ended up having to be exposed to some counselling on how to run my own social media page, all at my own expense. Has anyone heard of this book? That is fabulous. If you haven't heard of the book, it is a book that myself, Professor Grant Schofield, Chef Craig Roger wrote and published in 2015, all spearheaded by Dr. Louise Schofield. And we wrote this book primarily to get the low-carb message out in a way that was safe and a way that had no misinterpretation or confusion. You might not recognize the cover of this one. This was our original hard copy. It was a big, heavy book, had a hard copy. It was a real family affair. My sister did the graphic design work, and Grant's cousin did the photography. But excellent, still in the Schofield cupboard at home. And it worked, right? It worked. So before we talk about the second part of the wave, I just want to reflect, when you're standing on the wave, if everyone has ever caught a wave, their first big wave, I had to be steady, I had to be focused, and I had to be very balanced and pretty sure I knew what I was doing. And I had to try and stand up. And I managed to do that and start the ride of the wave. So if anyone has ever done any surfing or boogie boarding, you'll know that the middle part of the wave is the most exhilarating part. It's a lot of fun, and it can be treacherous as well. And that's pretty much how life was like for me. So what was happening in the scientific world? Virta Health, for those of you who don't know, is a US organization that basically manages type 2 diabetes by low-carb diets. But what's amazing about Virta is that they are not only a clinic, but they are a research center as well. So the combination of those two entities as an organization was really new to this space. Interesting thing about Virta Health, which is also really important, is that they were introducing new terminology such as diabetes remission and diabetes reversal, which is the first time diabetes had ever been described as anything else than a chronic progressive condition. Virta Health did stellar, and still do, stellar work. This is their data after 2 years. So they did, they looked at 1 year data and 2 year data. And you can see on your left-hand side that the Virta Health group that were doing low carb or keto had substantially greater positive outcomes in terms of reversal and remission compared to usual care. And usual care, which is the control group, usual care is literally usual care. So what the dietitian would talk to you about in terms of, eating Ministry of Health guidelines type diet. What was really exciting was on the other side of the slide, which is the medication reduction. Not so exciting for the pharmaceutical industry, but exciting for everyone else. The medications were being reduced in those people who were on low carb. And interestingly, they were going up and still are going up in those people who were doing usual care. And I guess that's why it's been referred to as a chronic progressive disease, because to manage the disease, your medications will keep going up. So what was also happening at this time was that there was a groundswell of consumer adoption of low carb. Okay, What the Fat was doing really well. It got itself a publisher and had a family. It's fabulous. Grant and I were doing talks at one point about, once a week. At one point, we were talking to schools, we were talking to community centers, we were talking to health professionals, all about low carb. It was everywhere. And our inboxes were flooded with messages about how people's lives were being changed. Diabetes associations across the globe were looking at the evidence and realizing that the evidence was robust enough to now include or endorse low carb as a therapeutic management approach for type 2 diabetes. So these are the organizations that have now included low carb in their guidelines. You're not missing anything. New Zealand is conspicuous in its lack of presence on this slide. The dietitians board was happy, right? No complaints, free reign. It was all really good. In fact, what was happening is I was invited to speak at one of our dietitians conferences, called Closing the Gap. And I was asked to speak on, or to join a panel, a keto panel. So for keto versus against keto panel. And here we've got myself and my colleague in the red, Sylvia North, also a dietitian. We were the full keto group, and my other colleagues in the beautifully dressed T-shirts, Team Veto Keto. And if you can see their T-shirts, they've got hashtag keto constipation and hashtag make carbs great again. So they went all out, but no surprises for who won the debate. So it certainly did close the gap, right? And there was a bit of humor as well as seriousness. So we were making inroads. Finally, looking at the end of the wave, or is it the end of the wave? In 2021 onwards, what happened was the book production stopped. The market was kind of saturated, so we didn't feel like we needed to do any more. We haven't broken up like a rock band. We're still a good team, and potentially there might be another book in us someday. But also the talks stopped a bit, and the consumer kind of hype died down a little bit. And that's what made me think, have I ridden the low-carb wave? Is this now over? So let's have a look at what's going on. At the moment, the studies are still coming through fast and furious, but interestingly, low-carb and keto is now being explored in different areas, in cancer, in neurological conditions, in other cardiometabolic conditions. So the research is advancing. We are starting to see the emerging evidence around ultra-processed foods. And my default has always been about the low-carb diet that if you truly eat whole unprocessed foods, it'll end up being a low-carb diet in some shape or form. So the Health Research Council of New Zealand is the biggest New Zealand funding body that funds health research. And at AUT, we've been putting in research grants for the last 6 years to research low carb. And each year we got a big rejection, up until last year. So last year, a team of academics alongside a team of clinicians, most of which are here today. We got funded $1.4 million from our government to look at healthcare systems, health delivery. So we are looking at the primary care setting, and we're looking at how low carb is being delivered in that primary care setting by GPs, by health coaches, and by others who are part of the team. So that is incredibly exciting and a really, really good message that the government is backing this. And then we've got Precure, who needs no mention. But Precure is training a whole new profession in healthcare. Health coaches, you are all here, or some of you are here. But the difference is that Precure is training you guys properly. So you are given all the evidence around diet, not just the very, very narrow Ministry of Health guidelines. So Precure is changing the healthcare system. But just before I get too complacent, as I'm surfing on my wave getting into the beach, I get a complaint from the Dietitians Board. And this was in June, a few months ago, and this time a young PhD dietitian, or she was doing her PhD, complained to the Dietitians Board that she was aware of a documentary that I featured in that was being shown to the medical students. And this documentary was about type 2 diabetes, and I was showing a family, Pacific family in South Auckland, how to cook a low-carb dinner for them and their family. I had no idea this was shown to the medical students and was quietly excited about that. But the dietitian complained by saying she's really concerned about my dietary advice because I've got a history of prescribing low-carb diets, and we know there is very little evidence to suggest that low-carb has efficacy on type 2 diabetes. True story. So I responded swiftly and sent them my 5-page response after the end of the weekend, and I basically indicated this was a great learning opportunity for this PhD student because she clearly hadn't mastered the fundamental skill of literature reviewing. I got my response from the Dietitians Board about 2 months later, and they said that the matter has been resolved and dropped, but they did want to meet with me because they were concerned about my lack of inclusion of whole grains in my communication on this video. So, and also they wanted to tell me about the diabetes resources that they had. So I responded to them. I said, thank you very much, but respectfully, I don't feel the need for a meeting, but thank you very much. And that was a month ago. On Wednesday, I got my response, which said, the Dietitians Board looks very dimly upon people who do not want to engage with their authority, with their regulatory body. So therefore, we are going to place you under audit next year. So it just indicated to me while I'm writing the end of the way, reflecting, there's still a lot of work to be done. In conclusion, as I'm riding on the wave, enjoying the sunshine on the way to the beach, reflecting on my journey, I turn around to look behind me, and what I see is a whole ocean filled with waves. And I see people at different stages of the wave. I see people that are just getting started on their own low-carb journey, and I see others that are riding the end of the wave next to me, in front of me, that are changing healthcare. Everyone is riding the wave at their own pace. But the most important thing is that there are more people getting into the water, and collectively, we are all moving forwards towards the future of medicine. Thank you.